For decades, fans around the world saw Cliff Richard as the spotless Peter Pan of pop. No public meltdowns. No outrageous scandals. No messy divorces splashed across tabloid covers. Just chart-topping songs, polished manners, unwavering faith, and a smile that never seemed to crack under pressure. To millions of fans, he represented stability in an entertainment industry filled with chaos. But behind that carefully guarded image was a man carrying emotional burdens, painful sacrifices, and deeply personal secrets that remained hidden from the public for decades. What happens when someone spends a lifetime protecting an image the world refuses to let go of? And what kind of loneliness can grow behind fame, fortune, and constant admiration? This is the untold story of faith, heartbreak, sacrifice, accusations, illness, and the hidden emotional cost of being Sir Cliff Richard. Long before the sold-out concerts, before the knighthood, and before becoming one of Britain's most successful entertainers, Cliff Richard was simply Harry Webb, a young boy born in India in 1940 during the final years of British colonial rule. His early childhood was comfortable. His father worked for the Indian Railways, and the family enjoyed a stable middle-class lifestyle. But history was changing rapidly around them. As India moved toward independence, political unrest and uncertainty spread throughout the region. Families who once felt secure suddenly faced an unpredictable future. By 1948, the Webb family made the difficult decision to leave India behind permanently and relocate to England. Imagine being a child forced to abandon everything familiar, the warm climate, childhood memories, friends, and sense of belonging, only to arrive in post-war Britain, where life was far colder, harsher, and financially difficult. The family moved into a cramped council house, a dramatic change from the life they once knew. For young Harry, the adjustment was emotionally overwhelming. Could those early experiences of instability and displacement explain why he later became so fiercely protective of his privacy? Did losing one home so early in life create a lifelong fear of losing everything again? In England, Harry lived an ordinary teenage life at first. He attended school, worked small jobs, and eventually became a filing clerk. But music offered him an escape from the limitations surrounding him. Then came the explosion of rock and roll. Artists like Little Richard and Elvis Presley completely transformed popular music in the 1950s. Young Harry became fascinated by their energy, style, and charisma. He realized music could reinvent a person entirely. And so Harry Webb disappeared. In his place emerged Cliff Richard. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. With slicked-back hair, confident stage presence, and rebellious charm, Cliff quickly became Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. His breakout hit, Move It, exploded across the country and changed his life almost overnight. Teenagers screamed at concerts. Young men copied his hairstyle and fashion choices. Record sales soared. The media became obsessed with him. Alongside the Shadows, Cliff Richard became one of the biggest stars Britain had ever produced. But while fame elevated him into superstardom, another force was quietly reshaping his personal life behind the scenes. Religion. During the mid-1960s, Cliff underwent a major spiritual transformation after embracing Christianity more deeply. His faith soon became the center of his identity. He developed close ties with evangelist Billy Graham and openly discussed religion during interviews, something unusual for a major pop star at the time. While other musicians embraced rebellion, drugs, alcohol, and controversy, Cliff deliberately moved in the opposite direction. He rejected the destructive behavior dominating the music scene and instead built an image based on morality, discipline, and clean living. At a time when bands like the Beatles were redefining celebrity culture through experimentation and controversy, Cliff became known as the polite gentleman of British entertainment. Parents trusted him. Television producers adored him. The press viewed him as safe and reliable. But that carefully maintained image slowly became a prison. Because while fans loved his wholesome reputation, Cliff increasingly feared that marriage, children, or public romantic struggles might damage the career he had spent years building. Think about that for a moment. How many people would willingly sacrifice the possibility of a family in order to protect their fame? And after making that sacrifice once, how difficult would it become to ever change course again? Over the years, several women entered Cliff's life and came close to altering his future forever. One of the most famous relationships involved Sue Barker during the 1980s. Their romance immediately attracted enormous public attention. Fans and journalists became convinced marriage was only a matter of time. Cliff reportedly called her constantly while she traveled internationally for tennis tournaments. During Wimbledon season, they spent long stretches of time together. Friends believed the relationship was serious, affectionate, and emotionally meaningful. But fame complicated everything. Photographers followed them relentlessly. Newspapers analyzed every public appearance. Every interaction became headline material. Sue later admitted that while she enjoyed being with Cliff, the pressure from constant media attention became exhausting. Then there was the age difference. Cliff was 16 years older than Sue, and concerns reportedly emerged about whether the relationship could truly survive long-term. Eventually, the romance ended quietly. Yet decades later, the relationship still lingered in public memory. Cliff eventually admitted he had once considered proposing marriage but ultimately decided he did not love Sue enough to take that step. Those comments reportedly frustrated Sue, who disliked seeing old private relationships repeatedly discussed in public years after they had ended. But Sue Barker was far from the only woman affected by Cliff's complicated emotional world. Back in the 1960s, Cliff had another deeply serious relationship with dancer Jackie Irving. By his own later admission, he genuinely considered marrying her. For a moment, it seemed possible that one of Britain's biggest stars might finally settle down. But before making the decision, Cliff consulted his manager. Would marriage hurt his popularity? The response deeply affected him. He was warned that marrying could seriously damage his appeal to female fans and potentially reduce his commercial success. Imagine hearing that your personal happiness might threaten everything you had worked for professionally. Would you choose love? Or would fear of losing fame become impossible to ignore? For Cliff, the warning changed everything. The relationship eventually faded, and over time a painful pattern emerged in his life. Emotional intimacy repeatedly collided with career pressures, public expectations, and personal uncertainty. As the decades passed, speculation about Cliff's private life only intensified. Because he never married and rarely discussed romance publicly, tabloids constantly fueled rumors and invasive questions. His intensely private nature only increased public curiosity. In many ways, the more carefully he guarded his personal life, the more determined the media became to uncover it. Yet Cliff rarely fought back publicly. Instead, he continued smiling through interviews, performing for audiences, and maintaining the polished image millions expected from him. But privately, maintaining that image required enormous emotional discipline. Friends and insiders occasionally hinted at loneliness beneath the surface. Fame had given Cliff wealth, admiration, and extraordinary success, but had it also isolated him from ordinary emotional experiences most people take for granted? Could someone spend decades surrounded by millions of fans while still feeling deeply alone? Then, in 2014, Cliff's carefully protected world suffered perhaps its greatest shock. British police launched an investigation into historical sexual abuse allegations connected to a religious event from decades earlier. The accusations immediately became international news. In a moment that horrified many observers, the BBC broadcast live helicopter footage as police raided Cliff's home. The images stunned the public. For a man who had spent over 50 years building a spotless reputation, the damage was immediate and devastating. Newspapers exploded with speculation. Television programs debated the allegations continuously. Cliff later described the experience as emotionally shattering. And perhaps most importantly, he had not even been arrested or charged with a crime. Think about the psychological impact of that. How would it feel to watch your home raided live on national television while millions of people instantly assumed the worst? Cliff consistently denied all allegations from the beginning. After a lengthy investigation, prosecutors announced there was insufficient evidence to bring charges against him. No criminal case was filed. But despite being cleared, the emotional scars remained severe. Cliff later admitted the ordeal pushed him into deep depression. He struggled with anxiety, fear, and emotional exhaustion. Friends reportedly worried about his mental state during that period. The public humiliation had shaken him profoundly. In a major legal battle afterward, Cliff sued the BBC for violating his privacy through their dramatic live coverage of the police raid. In 2018, he won the case in a landmark court victory that reignited national debate over media ethics and the treatment of public figures during criminal investigations. The ruling was seen by many as a major moment for privacy rights in Britain. Yet even after winning in court, Cliff admitted his life had permanently changed. He spoke openly about losing trust in people. He became increasingly cautious about public appearances and private interactions. The emotional damage lingered long after the headlines disappeared. And as if the accusations and public scrutiny were not enough, Cliff later faced another deeply personal challenge: health concerns and the realities of aging. Though he continued performing well into his 70s and 80s, fans slowly began noticing signs of physical strain. The energetic young rock star who once dominated stages across Britain was now confronting the same vulnerabilities that eventually affect everyone. Still, Cliff remained remarkably resilient. Even after decades in the spotlight, he continued touring, recording music, and maintaining a loyal fan base spanning multiple generations. Few entertainers in British history managed to sustain such longevity without completely collapsing under the pressure of fame. But perhaps that longevity came at a price few people truly understood. Because when you examine Cliff Richard's life closely, one question keeps resurfacing again and again. Did he spend so much time protecting his public image that he sacrificed the possibility of a normal private life? The fame brought success beyond imagination. The faith gave him purpose and discipline. The audience gave him admiration for over 6 decades. But what did he lose in return? A family, a lasting relationship, a sense of freedom, or simply the chance to live without constantly worrying about public judgment. Today, Cliff Richard remains one of Britain's most recognizable entertainers, admired by millions, respected for his resilience, and remembered as a defining figure in music history. 4 generations of fans, he represented stability in an industry constantly consumed by scandal, controversy, and collapse. His smile rarely disappeared. His public image stayed remarkably clean. And while countless stars from his era faded away, Cliff somehow endured decade after decade in the spotlight. But behind that polished image was a far more complicated human story. A story about sacrifice. A story about loneliness. A story about survival inside a life the world believed was perfect. For many people watching from the outside, Cliff Richard seemed to have everything: fame, wealth, adoration, royal recognition. Yet the deeper people looked into his life, the more mysterious he appeared. Why did someone surrounded by millions of fans always seem emotionally distant? Why did romance never last? And what happens to a person when protecting their image becomes more important than protecting their own happiness? Those questions followed him for decades. Early in his rise to fame during the late 1950s and 1960s, Cliff quickly realized that success in entertainment came with conditions. The music industry didn't just sell songs, it sold fantasy. Record executives wanted him charming, youthful, and endlessly available to fans. The image of the clean-cut bachelor became part of his brand, and the pressure to maintain it only intensified as his popularity exploded. Then love entered the picture. At different points in his life, Cliff reportedly formed deep emotional connections with women he genuinely cared about. But each time relationships began moving towards something serious, fear stepped in. Fear that marriage would damage his appeal. Fear that audiences would lose interest. Fear that everything he had worked for could suddenly disappear. So what did Cliff do? He ended the relationships. Can you imagine sacrificing someone you loved because of record sales, public expectations, and the pressure of celebrity culture? Even television host Piers Morgan later described the decision as ruthless. Yet Cliff defended himself by insisting he simply wasn't willing to gamble the career he had spent years building. To him, fame wasn't just success, it was survival. And that pattern repeated itself again and again throughout his life. Romance appeared, and then fame won. Over time, Cliff became known as the eternal bachelor of British pop culture. Fans endlessly speculated about why he never married, while tabloids turned his private life into a permanent mystery. Rumors surrounding his sexuality followed him for decades, becoming one of the most persistent talking points in British entertainment media. But Cliff repeatedly denied the speculation and refused to allow gossip to dictate his decisions. What made the situation even more fascinating was that Cliff never tried to silence rumors by rushing into a public marriage for appearances. In an industry where many celebrities carefully staged relationships to protect their image, Cliff refused to play that game. To him, marriage was sacred, not a publicity shield. Instead, he created a private world few people truly understood. He often lived alongside close friends, trusted companions, and longtime associates rather than building a traditional family life. His homes became quiet spaces away from cameras and reporters. There, he focused almost entirely on music, faith, charity work, and maintaining the carefully controlled image the public expected to see. And for decades, that strategy worked almost perfectly. Cliff Richard became one of Britain's most beloved entertainers. He dominated charts, sold millions of records, and starred in hugely successful films like Summer Holiday. Songs like Congratulations, Mistletoe and Wine, and Saviour's Day turned him into a permanent part of British pop culture. Unlike many stars from the rock and roll era, Cliff managed to reinvent himself repeatedly. Younger artists came and went, trends changed, audiences evolved, yet somehow he remained relevant. His concerts still sold out. His Christmas songs returned every holiday season. Entire generations grew up recognizing his voice. Then came one of the proudest moments of his life. In 1995, Queen Elizabeth II knighted him, officially making him Sir Cliff Richard, the first major British rock star ever to receive such recognition. For fans, it felt like the perfect ending to a legendary career. After decades of discipline, hard work, and careful image management, Cliff had achieved something almost no entertainer ever reaches: respectability at the highest national level. It should have been a triumphant final chapter. But then came 2014. And suddenly, everything collapsed. Police launched an investigation into allegations connected to incidents said to have occurred decades earlier. Although Cliff strongly denied all accusations and was never arrested or charged, the story exploded across British media almost overnight. Headlines dominated newspapers. Television coverage intensified. Social media turned brutal. But the most devastating moment came when the BBC broadcast a live helicopter raid on his property before Cliff had even spoken publicly. Imagine turning on the television and seeing your own home treated like a crime scene while millions of viewers watched in real time. How would anyone recover from that kind of humiliation? For Cliff, it was emotionally catastrophic. The allegations were eventually dropped after investigators found insufficient evidence. No charges were filed. Legally, he walked away cleared. But emotionally, the damage had already been done. Friends later described him as shattered. Cliff himself admitted the ordeal nearly destroyed him mentally. He spoke openly about sleepless nights, overwhelming anxiety, and intense anger toward those responsible for publicly destroying his reputation before any evidence had been proven. For a man who had spent his entire life protecting his image, the experience was devastating beyond words. At one point, the stress became so severe that he developed shingles dangerously close to his eyes. Doctors reportedly warned him that the condition could threaten his eyesight if complications worsened. Would most people survive that level of public humiliation at nearly 75 years old? Many celebrities disappear after scandals, even unproven ones. Some never emotionally recover. Others retreat from public life entirely. Yet somehow, Cliff kept going. Determined to defend himself, he took legal action against the BBC over its coverage of the police raid, and won. The case became a massive national debate in Britain about media ethics, privacy rights, and whether suspects should remain anonymous unless formal charges are filed. The victory helped restore part of his reputation, but it did not erase the emotional scars. Even after clearing his name, Cliff later admitted the experience permanently changed him. Trust became harder. Public appearances felt different. The confidence that once defined him had been deeply shaken. Yet while the world focused on the investigation, another private battle was unfolding quietly behind closed doors. In recent years, Cliff revealed that he had secretly fought early-stage prostate cancer while continuing to perform during international tours. The diagnosis reportedly came after a routine medical examination required for tour insurance. Can you imagine stepping on stage smiling for thousands of fans while privately wondering if you might have cancer? Thankfully, doctors detected the illness early before it spread further. Treatment proved successful, and Cliff eventually recovered. But at the time, he told almost nobody outside a trusted inner circle. Why? Because once again, he feared becoming vulnerable in public. Now in his 80s, however, Cliff has finally begun speaking openly about the experience. He encourages older men to stop pretending they are invincible and to get tested regularly. His message carries enormous weight precisely because he spent so much of his own life hiding fear behind confidence. And perhaps that is the real mystery surrounding Cliff Richard. For decades, people searched for some shocking scandal or hidden double life behind his carefully managed image. Tabloids constantly tried to expose secrets. Critics questioned his choices. Audiences wondered what he was hiding. But what if the truth is far simpler and far sadder? What if Cliff Richard was never living a double life at all? What if he was simply a man terrified of losing everything? Terrified of losing fame. Terrified of disappointing fans. Terrified of public judgment. And perhaps most painfully of all, terrified of allowing anyone close enough to truly know him. Despite unimaginable pressure, Cliff remained deeply committed to charity throughout his life. He donated millions to causes connected to poverty, children's health, education, and Alzheimer's research. After witnessing his own mother suffer from Alzheimer's disease, the issue became especially personal to him. Those close to Cliff often described him as generous, loyal, and far more emotionally sensitive than his public image suggested. But even kindness could not protect him from heartbreak. In 1999, the murder of close friend Jill Dando deeply shook him. The tragedy reportedly affected his faith and emotional stability in ways fans rarely saw publicly. For someone already struggling with trust and vulnerability, the loss became another painful reminder of how fragile life truly is. Yet somehow, despite accusations, heartbreak, illness, loneliness, and decades of relentless rumors, Cliff Richard survived it all. Today, many fans no longer see him simply as the cheerful Peter Pan of pop. Instead, they see something far more human. A man who spent his life balancing fame, faith, sacrifice, loneliness, and survival behind one of the most carefully protected images in entertainment history. And maybe that raises the biggest question of all. Did Cliff Richard spend his entire life protecting his career, only to sacrifice the deeper personal happiness he truly wanted? Or was the privacy he fought so hard to maintain the very thing that allowed him to survive an industry that destroys so many others? After everything he endured, one thing remains certain. Sir Cliff Richard is still one of the most mysterious figures in British entertainment history. What do you think? Did Cliff Richard make the right choice by putting fame before marriage and family? Or do you think those sacrifices ultimately cost him far too much in the end?